The hospital room smelled like death and broken dreams. Arya sat beside her mother's bed, watching the machines that kept her alive beep in a rhythm that matched her racing heart. The ventilator pushed air into her mother's lungs while monitors showed numbers that meant nothing to Arya but everything to the doctors who had just delivered the worst news of her life. 3 days, the doctor had said, his voice clinical and detached. Without the surgery she has 3 days. Now Arya stared at her mother's pale face, remembering how just 2 weeks ago they had been laughing together over coffee, planning Arya's return to college in the fall. Her mother, Sarah, had been the strongest person Arya knew, working 2 jobs to support them after Arya's father left when she was 12. Seeing her like this, helpless and fading, felt like watching the sun go out. The door creaked open and Arya looked up to see a man she barely recognized. Her father, Thomas, stepped into the room. He looked older than his 55 years, his hair completely gray now, his face marked by lines that spoke of too many cigarettes and too much alcohol. They hadn't spoken in 3 years, not since he had shown up drunk at her high school graduation. "Arya," he said, his voice rough. "We need to talk. Now." Arya stood up, anger flashing through her grief. "Mom is dying and you want to talk?" "About saving her," Thomas said quietly. "I have a way." Arya felt her world tilt. "What are you talking about?" Thomas moved closer to the bed, looking down at his ex-wife with something that might have been regret. "I know someone with money. Enough to pay for the surgery and everything she needs." "You know someone with $500,000? Arya couldn't hide her disbelief. Her father had never had money for anything important, not for her school clothes, not for groceries, not even for his own rent most of the time. "Vincent Cross," Thomas said the name like it tasted bitter. He's willing to help." Arya had heard the name before. Everyone in the city had. Vincent Cross was the reclusive billionaire who owned half the tech companies downtown. He never appeared in public, never gave interviews, and the few photos of him that existed showed a man with terrible scars covering the left side of his face. People called him the beast of the business world, though whether that was because of his appearance or his ruthless business practices, Arya wasn't sure. "Why would Vincent Cross help us?" Arya asked. "We're nobody to him." Thomas was quiet for a long moment, staring at the machines keeping Sarah alive. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. "Because I have something he wants." "What could you possibly have that a billionaire wants?" Thomas turned to look at his daughter, and Arya saw something in his eyes that made her stomach drop. It was the same look he'd had when he'd gambled away their house when she was 16. "You," he said. The word hit Arya like a physical blow. She took a step back, shaking her head. "What are you talking about?" "He wants a wife," Thomas said quickly, the words tumbling out. "Someone respectable, someone clean. Someone who won't ask questions about his business or his appearance. In exchange, he'll pay for your mother's surgery and all her medical expenses." Arya felt like she was falling through space. "You're talking about selling me?" "It's not like that," Thomas said, but his eyes couldn't meet hers. "It's a business arrangement. A marriage on paper. He gets respectability, you get your mother's life." "You're insane." Arya turned back to her mother's bedside, gripping the rail so hard her knuckles went white. "This isn't the Middle Ages. People don't arrange marriages for money." "They do when someone's life depends on it," Thomas said. "Arya, look at her. Really look at her. She's dying. The doctor said 3 days without the surgery. We don't have $500,000. We don't have $50,000. We don't even have $5,000. Arya closed her eyes, feeling tears she'd been holding back all day finally start to fall. He was right and she hated him for it. They had nothing. Her mother's insurance had denied the claim, calling the surgery experimental. The hospital wanted payment up front. Every bank, every loan company, every charity they'd contacted had said no. What kind of man makes a deal like this? Arya asked without opening her eyes. "A desperate one," Thomas said. "He's been trying to find a wife for 2 years. His business partners won't take him seriously. They think he's unstable because he won't appear in public. Some of them are threatening to pull out of major deals. A wife would change that. And he chose me because? Because you're beautiful. Because you're educated. Because you have no criminal record and no scandal attached to your name." Thomas paused. "And because you need the money enough to say yes." Arya opened her eyes and looked at her mother again. Sarah's face was peaceful in unconsciousness, but Arya could see how thin she'd become, how the illness had eaten away at her. This woman had sacrificed everything for Arya, working 16-hour days to pay for her school clothes, going without food so Arya could eat, taking on debt for Arya's college textbooks. How do you even know him? Arya asked. Thomas was quiet again, and when he answered, his voice was full of shame. I work for one of his companies. Security. Night shift at one of his buildings downtown. He knows about my situation. About your mother. He made the offer last week. You've been thinking about this for a week? I've been praying for another option for a week, Thomas corrected. This is the only one that showed up. Arya turned to face her father fully. What exactly would this marriage involve? I don't know all the details. He wants to meet you first. Tomorrow if you're willing. He lives in the old Preston mansion up on the hill. You'd live there with him, appear at business functions as his wife. Beyond that. Thomas shrugged. I think that would be between you and him. The machines continued their steady beeping, marking time that her mother didn't have. Arya thought about her plans for the future, finishing college, maybe becoming a teacher like her mother had always wanted to be before she'd had to drop out to support her family. She thought about the boys she'd dated, the idea she'd had of falling in love naturally, getting married in a white dress surrounded by friends and family who were happy for her. All of that seemed like fantasy now, as distant and unreachable as the stars outside the hospital window. If I say yes, Arya said slowly, the surgery happens immediately? He'll have the money transferred within an hour of your agreement, Thomas said. He's already spoken to the hospital administration. They're standing by. Arya looked at her mother one more time. Sarah had given up everything for her daughter's future. Now it was Arya's turn to sacrifice for her mother's life. Call him, Arya said, her voice steady despite the fear racing through her veins. Tell him I'll meet with him tomorrow. Thomas nodded, relief flooding his face. Arya, I know this isn't what you wanted. Don't, Arya cut him off. Just make the call. And Dad? If this goes wrong, if he hurts me or if this is some kind of trick, I will never forgive you. Never. Thomas pulled out his phone with shaking hands. As he dialed, Arya sat back down beside her mother and took her hand. It was cold and thin, but she could still feel the pulse at her wrist. I'm going to save you, Mom, she whispered. Whatever it costs. Outside, storm clouds gathered over the city, and in a mansion on the hill, a scarred man sat alone in his study, waiting for a phone call that would change two lives forever. Neither Arya nor Vincent knew that this desperate bargain would become something neither of them expected. But for now, all that mattered was the next 24 hours and the choice that would determine whether love could grow from the seeds of necessity. The machines beeped on, counting down the time until everything changed. The Preston mansion sat on 5 acres of perfectly manicured grounds, surrounded by a stone wall that seemed designed to keep the world out as much as to keep residents in. Arya sat in the passenger seat of her father's old pickup truck, staring up at the iron gates that blocked their path. Through the bars, she could see a winding driveway that disappeared behind ancient oak trees, leading to a house that looked more like a castle than a home. You sure about this? Thomas asked, his hands gripping the steering wheel. His knuckles were white, and Arya realized he was as nervous as she was. No, Arya said honestly. But Mom doesn't have time for me to be sure. Thomas pressed a button on the intercom system mounted next to the gate. A voice answered immediately, crisp and professional. State your business. Thomas Wright and his daughter Arya. We have an appointment with Mr. Cross. The gates swung open silently, and Thomas drove slowly up the winding drive. The house that emerged from behind the trees was even more intimidating than Arya had imagined. 3 stories of gray stone rose up like something from a Gothic novel, complete with towers and arched windows that looked like eyes staring down at them. Ivy covered much of the walls, giving the whole place an air of age and secrets. Jesus, Thomas muttered under his breath. How much money does this guy have? Arya didn't answer. She was too busy trying to calm the panic rising in her chest. This wasn't just a house, it was a fortress. What kind of man needed to live in a place like this? They parked in a circular driveway in front of massive wooden doors. Before they could even get out of the truck, one of the doors opened and a woman emerged. She was probably in her 60s, with silver hair pulled back in a neat bun and wearing a simple black dress. Despite her formal appearance, her smile was warm. Miss Wright, she said as Arya stepped out of the truck. I'm Mrs. Patterson, Mr. Cross's housekeeper. He's waiting for you in his study. Arya nodded, not trusting her voice. Her father came around the truck and stood beside her, looking as out of place as she felt. This way, please, Mrs. Patterson said, leading them toward the imposing front doors. The inside of the mansion was even more overwhelming than the outside. The entrance hall was the size of Arya's entire apartment, with a ceiling that soared 2 stories high. A crystal chandelier hung in the center, casting rainbow light across marble floors that reflected their footsteps. Oil paintings lined the walls, portraits of stern-faced people from another century who seemed to judge everyone who passed beneath their gaze. "Mr. Cross doesn't receive many visitors," Mrs. Patterson said as they walked down a long hallway. "He's quite nervous about this meeting." "He's nervous?" Arya asked, surprised. Mrs. Patterson smiled. "Despite what people say about him, Mr. Cross is actually quite shy. He doesn't handle social situations well." They stopped outside a heavy wooden door. Mrs. Patterson knocked softly, then opened it without waiting for an answer. "Mr. Cross? Miss Wright is here." The study was smaller than Arya had expected, but somehow more intimidating. Books lined every wall from floor to ceiling, and a fire crackled in a stone fireplace despite the warm weather outside. Heavy leather furniture filled the space, and the air smelled of old books and expensive cologne. Behind a massive desk sat the man Arya was supposed to marry. Vincent Cross was tall, she could tell that even though he was sitting down. His dark hair was neat but looked like he ran his hands through it often. He wore an expensive suit that fit perfectly, and his right hand, the one she could see clearly, was long-fingered and elegant. But it was his face that drew her attention, just as she knew it would. The right side of his face was handsome in a classical way, strong jaw, high cheekbone, intelligent dark eyes. But the left side was marked by scars that ran from his temple to his jaw, creating a web of raised, discolored skin that pulled slightly at the corner of his mouth and eye. The scars were old, she could tell, but they were extensive enough to completely change the shape of that side of his face. Vincent stood as they entered, and Arya saw that he was indeed tall, probably 6 feet 3 or 4. He moved with the confidence of someone used to being in charge, but she caught the way his left hand automatically moved to partially cover the scarred side of his face. "Miss Wright," he said, his voice deep and carefully controlled. "Thank you for coming." "Thank you for seeing me," Arya replied, proud that her voice didn't shake. Vincent gestured to the chairs in front of his desk. "Please sit. Mrs. Patterson, could you bring some tea?" "Of course, sir." The housekeeper left, closing the door behind her. An uncomfortable silence filled the room. Vincent sat back down behind his desk, and Arya noticed that he positioned himself so the scarred side of his face was in shadow. Thomas shifted nervously in his chair, clearly out of his element. "I assume your father has explained the situation," Vincent said finally. "Some of it," Arya said. "I understand you need a wife for business reasons, and you're willing to pay for my mother's medical expenses in exchange." Vincent nodded. "That's correct. I should be clear about what this arrangement would involve." He opened a folder on his desk and pulled out several papers. "I've had my lawyers draw up a contract that outlines everything." He slid the papers across the desk to her. Arya picked them up, surprised by how detailed they were. "The marriage would be legal but limited," Vincent continued. "You would live here in the mansion in your own suite of rooms. You would accompany me to necessary business functions perhaps once or twice a month. In public, we would present ourselves as a married couple." "And in private?" Arya asked. Vincent's jaw tightened slightly. "In private, we would live essentially separate lives. You would have complete privacy and freedom within the house and grounds. I work long hours and travel frequently on business. Our paths would cross minimally." Arya scanned the contract. It was more generous than she had expected. Her mother's medical expenses would be paid in full, with a trust fund set up for ongoing care. Arya herself would receive a substantial monthly allowance, and after 1 year she would receive a lump sum payment that would be enough to finish college and start any career she chose. "What about after the year?" she asked. "The contract is for 1 year initially," Vincent said. "At the end of that time we can choose to renew it or file for divorce. Either way you would be financially secure." Thomas leaned forward. "That's incredibly generous, Mr. Cross." Vincent's eyes never left Arya's face. "I'm not looking for gratitude, Mr. Wright. I'm looking for a business partner." "Why me?" Arya asked. "You could have your pick of women. Women who would be excited about this arrangement." For the first time, Vincent's controlled expression cracked slightly. "Women who would pretend to be excited about the money, you mean? Women who would look at me with pity or revulsion every day, but hide it well enough for public appearances. And you think I won't?" Vincent studied her face carefully. "I think you're honest enough to tell me if you can't handle it. Most people can't look at me directly for more than a few seconds. You've been looking at me since you sat down." Arya realized he was right. She had been looking at him, not just at his scars but at him as a whole person. The scars were noticeable, certainly, but they didn't make him hideous like the gossips claimed. They just made him different. The scars don't make you ugly, she said quietly. They just make you look like someone who's been through something terrible. Vincent's eyes widened slightly as if her words had surprised him. Most people would disagree with you. Most people are idiots. A ghost of a smile crossed Vincent's face, the first real expression she'd seen from him. Indeed they are. Mrs. Patterson returned with a tea service, setting it on the table between them. As she poured, Vincent continued explaining the arrangement. You would have access to a car and driver whenever you need to go anywhere. Your clothing and personal expenses would be covered. The only requirements are that you maintain the appearance of being my wife in public and that you keep the details of our arrangement private. What about communication? Arya asked. I mean, if we're going to convince people we're married, shouldn't we at least be able to have a conversation? Vincent nodded. We would need to spend some time getting to know basic information about each other. Favorite foods, childhood memories, that sort of thing. Enough to pass casual questioning. Arya sipped her tea, thinking. The arrangement was more generous and less invasive than she had feared. Vincent Cross wasn't asking her to be a real wife in any meaningful sense, just a business associate who happened to share his name and home. There's one more thing, Vincent said, his voice more hesitant. I should warn you that I'm not easy to live with. I keep unusual hours. I don't like unexpected visitors or changes to routine. And He paused, seeming to struggle with the words. I'm not good with people. Small talk, social niceties, they don't come naturally to me. That's okay, Arya said. I'm pretty quiet myself. Vincent looked surprised again. You're not what I expected. What did you expect? Someone more desperate? More willing to agree to anything for the money? Arya set down her teacup. Mr. Cross, I am desperate. My mother is dying and I'll do whatever it takes to save her. But that doesn't mean I'm going to pretend this is easy or that I'm not scared. This is the biggest decision I've ever made, and I'm making it based on circumstances, not choice. Vincent nodded slowly. I appreciate your honesty. Can I ask you something? Arya said. Of course. Why is having a wife so important to your business? I mean, it's not the 1950s. Plenty of successful businessmen are single. Vincent was quiet for a long moment, his fingers drumming against the desk. My business partners are old-fashioned men who believe that a man who can't maintain personal relationships can't be trusted with professional ones. They see my reclusiveness as a sign of instability. Several major deals have fallen through because they won't work with someone they consider unpredictable. And having a wife would change that? It would prove I'm capable of normal human relationships. That I'm not the monster they imagine me to be. Arya studied his face, seeing past the scars to the intelligence and frustration in his eyes. You're not a monster at all, are you? Vincent's control slipped for just a moment, and she saw something vulnerable in his expression. I hope not, he said quietly. Thomas cleared his throat. Arya, we should probably make a decision. The hospital is waiting. Arya looked at her father, then back at Vincent. The contract was fair, more than fair. Vincent himself seemed like a decent man in an impossible situation, just like she was. And her mother was lying in a hospital bed, running out of time. If I agree to this, she said, when would the wedding take place? As soon as possible, Vincent replied. This week if you're willing. The money for your mother's surgery would be transferred as soon as we sign the marriage certificate. This week. Arya's voice cracked slightly. I know it's fast, Vincent said. But given your mother's condition and my business timeline, sooner is better than later. Arya closed her eyes, seeing her mother's pale face again. When she opened them, Vincent was watching her with an expression that might have been sympathy. Okay, she said, the word coming out barely above a whisper. I'll do it. Vincent nodded once, crisp and businesslike. Thank you. I'll have my lawyers finalize the paperwork and arrange for the ceremony. As they stood to leave, Vincent cleared his throat. Miss Wright? Arya? I want you to know that I understand this isn't easy for you. I'll do everything I can to make this arrangement as comfortable as possible. Arya looked at him one more time, this man she was about to marry for all the wrong reasons. Thank you, Mr. Cross. Vincent. I appreciate that. As they walked back through the mansion's grand halls, Arya felt like she was moving through a dream. In less than a week, she would be Mrs. Vincent Cross, living in this enormous house, married to a man she'd just met. It wasn't the life she'd planned, but it was the life that would save her mother. And maybe, just maybe, it wouldn't be as terrible as she feared. The storm clouds that had been gathering all day finally opened up as they drove away from the mansion, rain beating against the windshield like tears. But for the first time in weeks, Arya felt something that might have been hope. Her mother was going to live. Whatever came after that, they would face it together. The courthouse was nothing like the churches Arya had dreamed about as a little girl. No stained glass windows, no flowers, no music, just gray walls, fluorescent lighting, and the smell of disinfectant that seemed to follow her everywhere lately. She sat on a hard wooden bench outside the judge's chambers, wearing the only dress she owned that seemed appropriate for a wedding, a simple navy blue sundress her mother had bought her for graduation. Vincent sat beside her, looking perfect in an expensive charcoal suit. He hadn't said much since they'd met in the courthouse lobby 20 minutes ago, just a polite, "Good morning, and you look nice." Now he stared straight ahead, his jaw tight with tension that matched her own. "Are you ready for this?" he asked quietly. Arya almost laughed. "I don't think anyone's ever ready to marry a stranger." Fair point. Vincent turned to look at her, and she saw something that might have been regret in his dark eyes. "Last chance to change your mind. I'll still pay for your mother's surgery either way." The offer surprised her. "You would do that?" "Your mother shouldn't suffer because of my problems." Arya studied his scarred face, seeing sincerity there that made her chest tight. "Thank you for saying that. But no, I'm not changing my mind. We made a deal." Vincent nodded. "We did." The door to the judge's chambers opened and a clerk called their names. This was it. In 10 minutes she would be married. They stood and walked into the small room where Judge Hamilton waited behind his desk. He was a kind-looking man in his 60s who had probably performed thousands of these ceremonies, but something in his expression suggested he sensed this wasn't a typical wedding. "Mr. Cross, Miss Wright," he said warmly. "I understand you'd like to keep this simple?" "Yes, Your Honor," Vincent replied. "Just the legal requirements." Mrs. Patterson and Thomas were their witnesses, standing slightly behind them. Arya's father looked uncomfortable in his only suit, while Mrs. Patterson smiled encouragingly. Arya was grateful Vincent had suggested bringing his housekeeper. At least one person in the room seemed happy about this wedding. "Very well," Judge Hamilton said. "Please join hands and face each other." Arya turned toward Vincent, her heart hammering so hard she was sure everyone could hear it. Vincent's hand was warm and steady when she placed hers in it, and she was grateful he didn't seem to notice how much hers was shaking. "Vincent Cross, do you take Arya Wright to be your lawfully wedded wife, to have and to hold, in sickness and in health, for richer or poorer, for better or worse, until death do you part?" Vincent's voice was clear and strong. "I do." Judge Hamilton turned to Arya. "Arya Wright, do you take Vincent Cross to be your lawfully wedded husband, to have and to hold, in sickness and in health, for richer or poorer, for better or worse, until death do you part?" The words stuck in her throat for a moment. This was really happening. She was really doing this. "I do," she managed. "The rings?" Vincent reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out 2 simple gold bands. They weren't fancy, but they looked expensive and perfectly sized. He must have guessed at her ring size somehow. "Repeat after me," Judge Hamilton said to Vincent. "With this ring I thee wed." "With this ring I thee wed," Vincent said, sliding the band onto Arya's finger. His touch was gentle, careful, as if he was handling something precious and fragile. Arya took the larger ring with trembling fingers and repeated the words, slipping it onto Vincent's hand. It fit perfectly. "By the power vested in me by the state, I now pronounce you husband and wife." Judge Hamilton smiled. "You may kiss the bride." The moment stretched out, awkward and tense. Vincent looked at Arya questioningly, and she realized he was asking permission. She nodded slightly and he leaned down, pressing his lips to hers in the briefest, most careful kiss imaginable. It was over in seconds, but Arya felt the warmth of it all the way to her toes. "Congratulations, Mr. and Mrs. Cross," Judge Hamilton said, but his voice seemed to come from very far away. "Mrs. Cross." She was Mrs. Cross now. Arya Cross. The name felt foreign in her mind, like a costume that didn't quite fit. They signed the marriage certificate in a blur of paperwork and congratulations. Thomas hugged her awkwardly, whispering, "Your mother's surgery is scheduled for this afternoon," in her ear. Mrs. Patterson kissed both her cheeks and said she was delighted to have another woman in the house. Before she knew it, they were outside in the bright morning sunshine, and Vincent was opening the door of a sleek black car for her. "I thought we could go straight to the hospital," he said as they settled into the leather seats. "I'd like to meet your mother before her surgery if that's all right." "You don't have to do that," Arya said. "She's my mother-in-law now," Vincent replied. "Of course I should meet her." The words hit Arya with fresh unreality. Her mother would have a son-in-law. This strange, scarred man was now part of their tiny family. They drove to the hospital in comfortable silence. Vincent's driver, a quiet older man named James, navigated the city traffic with practiced ease while Arya twisted her new wedding ring around her finger. It was heavier than she'd expected, solid and permanent in a way that made her stomach flutter. "Nervous about the surgery?" Vincent asked, noticing her fidgeting. "Terrified," Arya admitted. "Even with the best doctors, there are no guarantees." "The surgeon I arranged is the best in the state," Vincent said. "If anyone can help your mother, it's Dr. Rodriguez." "You chose the surgeon yourself?" Vincent nodded. "I did some research. Your mother deserves the very best care." Arya felt tears prick her eyes. "Why are you being so kind about this? I mean, you got what you wanted, a wife. You don't have to go above and beyond." Vincent was quiet for so long that Arya thought he wasn't going to answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was softer than usual. "My mother died when I was 15, he said. "Cancer. I watched her fade away over 2 years, and there was nothing I could do to help her. If I can spare you that experience, I will." "I'm sorry," Arya said quietly. "That must have been terrible." "It was." Vincent stared out the window. "She was the only person who ever looked at me after the accident without flinching. After she died, I learned to hide from the world. It seemed easier than dealing with people's reactions." "What happened?" Arya asked gently. "The accident, I mean. You don't have to tell me if you don't want to." Vincent touched the scars on his face unconsciously. "House fire when I was 8. I was trapped in my bedroom on the 2nd floor. My father got me out, but not before the flames." He shrugged. "I spent 6 months in the hospital. Multiple surgeries, skin grafts. They did what they could, but people still stare," Arya finished. "People still run away," Vincent corrected. "Or they look at me with pity, which is almost worse than fear." Arya studied his profile as he gazed out the window. "You know, from this angle you can barely see the scars at all." Vincent turned to look at her, surprise flickering across his features. "Most people prefer this side of my face." "Most people are missing the point," Arya said. "The scars are part of who you are. They tell a story about a little boy who survived something terrible. That's not ugly, that's brave." Vincent stared at her for a long moment, something shifting in his expression. "You really mean that?" "I do." They had reached the hospital. As James parked the car, Vincent cleared his throat. "Arya, I want you to know that even though this marriage is a business arrangement, I take the commitment seriously. I will do everything in my power to be a good husband to you, even if it's not a traditional marriage." "Thank you," Arya said. "I'll try to be a good wife too. Whatever that means in our situation." Vincent smiled, the first real smile she'd seen from him. It transformed his whole face, making him look younger and less guarded. "I think it means we take care of each other," he said. They walked into the hospital together, Arya's hand tucked into the crook of Vincent's arm. It felt natural, comfortable, like they'd been walking together for years instead of hours. Sarah was awake when they entered her room, looking small and frail against the white hospital sheets but more alert than she'd been in days. Her face lit up when she saw Arya. "My beautiful girl," she said, her voice weak but warm. "How did it go?" "Mom, I'd like you to meet my husband," Arya said, the words feeling strange on her tongue. "Vincent Cross." Sarah's eyes widened as she took in Vincent's appearance, but to her credit, she recovered quickly and smiled. "Vincent, it's so nice to meet you. Thank you for everything you're doing for me." Vincent stepped forward and took Sarah's hand gently. "It's my pleasure, Mrs. Wright. I'm sorry we're meeting under these circumstances, but I hope to get to know you much better once you're feeling stronger. Please call me Sarah," she said, then looked between Arya and Vincent with curiosity. "You two seem very comfortable together for such a quick courtship." Arya felt heat rise in her cheeks, but Vincent answered smoothly. "When you know," he said, squeezing Arya's hand. "Sometimes the heart doesn't follow the timeline we expect." Sarah smiled. "That's very romantic. Your father never said anything that sweet to me in 20 years of marriage." A nurse came in to prep Sarah for surgery and they said their goodbyes. Sarah hugged Arya tightly, whispering "I love you" in her ear. Then, to Arya's surprise, she reached out and squeezed Vincent's hand. "Take care of my daughter," she said to him. "I will," Vincent promised, and Arya could hear the sincerity in his voice. As they wheeled Sarah away for surgery, Arya felt tears slide down her cheeks. Vincent handed her his handkerchief without a word, then guided her to the waiting room chairs. "The surgery will take about 4 hours," he said quietly. "Would you like me to stay with you?" Arya nodded, not trusting her voice. Vincent sat beside her, close enough that she could feel his warmth but not so close as to make her uncomfortable. They waited in silence, watching other families deal with their own medical crises, each lost in their own thoughts. "Vincent?" Arya said after an hour had passed. "Yes. Thank you. For all of this. I know you're getting something out of this arrangement too, but you didn't have to be so kind to my mother. Or to me." Vincent turned to look at her, his dark eyes serious. "Arya, I may not be good at expressing emotions, but I'm not heartless. We may have married for practical reasons, but that doesn't mean we can't treat each other with respect and kindness." "Is that what you want? Respect and kindness?" "It's more than most people have offered me in a very long time," Vincent said quietly. They settled back into comfortable silence, and Arya found herself studying her new husband. Despite his scars, despite the circumstances of their marriage, she felt safe with him. There was something solid and dependable about Vincent Cross that had nothing to do with his money and everything to do with the man himself. 3.5 hours later, Dr. Rodriguez emerged from surgery with a smile on her face. "The surgery was a complete success," she announced. "We were able to remove all of the affected tissue, and the reconstruction went perfectly. Your mother should make a full recovery." Arya burst into tears of relief, and Vincent's arm went around her shoulders, pulling her against his side. She could feel his own relief in the way his body relaxed, and she realized that he had been just as worried about her mother as she was. "Thank you," she whispered against his shoulder. "Thank you for saving her." "Thank you for trusting me enough to let me try," Vincent replied. As they drove home to Vincent's mansion, her home now, Arya reminded herself she caught Vincent watching her in the reflection of the car window. "What are you thinking about?" she asked. "How different this day turned out than I expected," he said. "Different how?" Vincent was quiet for a moment. "I expected today to feel like a business transaction. Instead, it feels like the beginning of something I can't quite name yet." Arya looked down at her wedding ring, gleaming gold in the late afternoon sun. "I know what you mean," she said softly. As they pulled through the gates of the mansion, Arya realized that despite everything, the strange circumstances, the man she barely knew, the uncertain future ahead of them, she felt something she hadn't felt in months. Oh, maybe this arrangement would work out better than either of them dared to expect. Maybe kindness and respect could grow into something deeper given time. And maybe, just maybe, she had married a man who would surprise her in the best possible ways. Only time would tell, but for the first time since her mother's diagnosis, Arya was looking forward to finding out. The guest suite Vincent had prepared for Arya was larger than her entire apartment had been. It consisted of a spacious bedroom with a king-sized bed, a sitting area with comfortable chairs and a fireplace, a walk-in closet that could have housed a small family, and a bathroom that featured both a deep soaking tub and a separate shower with more jets and settings than she knew what to do with. Mrs. Patterson had shown her around the suite on their first evening as a married couple, pointing out where fresh towels were kept, how to adjust the temperature, and which button to press if she needed anything during the night. "Mr. Cross's suite is at the other end of the hall," Mrs. Patterson had explained. "He's given strict instructions that you're not to be disturbed unless you request it." Now, 3 days into her new life as Mrs. Vincent Cross, Arya stood at the window of her sitting room, looking out at the mansion's grounds. Gardens stretched as far as she could see, perfectly maintained but somehow cold in their precision. Everything about this place was beautiful and expensive and utterly without warmth. She had barely seen Vincent since their wedding day. He left the house before she woke up each morning and returned long after she'd gone to bed. Mrs. Patterson explained that he was preparing for a major business deal and working 16-hour days, but Arya couldn't shake the feeling that he was avoiding her. Their only interactions had been brief and polite, passing each other in the hallway, sharing a few words over breakfast on the one morning when she'd gotten up early enough to catch him before he left. He asked about her comfort, she assured him she was fine, and they maintained the careful distance of strangers sharing the same roof. Which, Arya supposed, was exactly what they were. A soft knock on her door interrupted her thoughts. "Come in," she called. Mrs. Patterson entered carrying a tea tray. "I thought you might like some company," she said warmly. "You've seemed a bit lonely these past few days." "Is it that obvious?" Arya asked, settling into one of the chairs by the fireplace. "It's a big house for someone used to having people around," Mrs. Patterson said, pouring tea for both of them. "Mr. Cross tends to forget that not everyone enjoys solitude as much as he does." "How long have you worked for him?" 15 years, Mrs. Patterson replied. "I came to work for him right after his mother died. He was just 20 then, trying to run his father's business empire and deal with his own grief." "His father died too?" Heart attack 6 months after his wife passed. Vincent inherited everything at 20, the houses, the businesses, the responsibility. Most young men would have been overwhelmed, but Vincent threw himself into work like it was the only thing keeping him sane. Arya sipped her tea, processing this information. That must have been incredibly difficult. It was. And then there were the vultures, distant relatives, business partners, social climbers, all trying to take advantage of a grieving young man. Vincent learned quickly not to trust anyone's motives. Mrs. Patterson studied Arya's face. I think that's why this marriage arrangement appeals to him. At least he knows exactly why you're here. Because I needed the money, Arya said flatly. Because you're honest about needing the money, Mrs. Patterson corrected. Most of the women who've pursued Vincent over the years have pretended to be interested in him for himself, when really they just wanted access to his wealth. At least you're not lying to him. Arya set down her teacup. That doesn't make me noble, Mrs. Patterson. I married him for his money. That makes me no different from anyone else. Child, you married him to save your mother's life. There's a world of difference between greed and love. Before Arya could respond, they heard the front door open and close. Vincent's voice carried down the hallway as he spoke to someone, probably James, about the car or his schedule for tomorrow. He's home early tonight, Mrs. Patterson observed. Perhaps you should join him for dinner. I don't want to bother him, Arya said quickly. He made it clear that we'd live separate lives. Separate but not isolated, Mrs. Patterson said firmly. You're his wife now, Arya. Even if it's just a business arrangement, you still need to build some kind of relationship with each other. How else will you convince people you're really married? Arya knew she was right. They had a business function to attend next week, some charity gala where Vincent needed to make appearances with his new wife. They couldn't walk in there as complete strangers and expect to fool anyone. I suppose you're right, Arya admitted. Of course I am, Mrs. Patterson said with a smile. Now go change into something nice. I'll tell Vincent you'll be joining him for dinner in the dining room at 7. An hour later, Arya stood outside the dining room doors, smoothing down the skirt of the simple black dress she'd chosen. She could hear Vincent moving around inside, the clink of silverware against china. Taking a deep breath, she knocked. Come in, his voice called. Vincent stood at the head of a dining table that could have seated 20 people. He had changed out of his business suit into dark slacks and a white button-down shirt with the sleeves rolled up. The casual clothes made him seem less intimidating, more approachable. Arya, he said, surprise flickering across his face. I wasn't expecting you. Mrs. Patterson thought we should have dinner together, Arya said, suddenly feeling foolish. But if you'd rather eat alone. No, Vincent said quickly. Please sit. I'd welcome the company. He pulled out the chair to his right, and Arya sat down, trying not to feel dwarfed by the enormous room. Crystal chandeliers cast warm light over mahogany furniture and oil paintings that probably cost more than most people's houses. How was your day? Vincent asked as he returned to his seat. Quiet, Arya admitted. I'm still getting used to all of this. She gestured around the opulent dining room. Vincent nodded. It's a lot to adjust to. I sometimes forget how overwhelming this house can be to people who didn't grow up in it. You grew up here? I did. My great-grandfather built this place in 1923. It's been in the Cross family ever since. Vincent's expression grew distant. Sometimes I think about selling it, finding something smaller and more modern. But it's the only home I've ever known. Mrs. Patterson appeared with their dinner, perfectly prepared salmon with vegetables that looked like works of art. They ate in comfortable silence for a few minutes before Vincent spoke again. How is your mother doing? Much better, Arya said, her face brightening. I visited her this afternoon. The doctors say she can go home next week. That's wonderful news. Will she be staying at her apartment? For now. She insists she can take care of herself, but I'm not sure she should be alone so soon after surgery. Vincent set down his fork. She could stay here if she'd like. We have plenty of guest rooms, and Mrs. Patterson wouldn't mind the extra company. Arya looked at him in surprise. You would do that? Of course. She's family now. The casual way he said it made Arya's chest tighten. Family. When was the last time she'd felt like she had a real family? Thank you, she said softly. That's very generous. It's practical, Vincent said, but his tone was gentle. You'll worry less if she's here where you can keep an eye on her recovery. They finished dinner while making small talk about Arya's college plans and Vincent's work. It was easier than she'd expected talking to him. He was actually quite funny when he relaxed, with a dry sense of humor that caught her off guard. There's something I should mention, Vincent said as Mrs. Patterson cleared their plates. We have a function to attend this Saturday. The Children's Hospital Charity Gala. It's important that we make a good impression. Of course, Arya said. What do I need to know? Vincent pulled out his phone and scrolled through what looked like a detailed file. The guest list includes most of my major business partners and their wives. They'll be curious about you, probably ask questions about how we met, how long we've been together. What should I tell them? We met through your father's work at one of my buildings. I was immediately taken with your intelligence and beauty. We had a whirlwind courtship because when you know someone is right for you, there's no point in waiting. Arya nodded, memorizing the story. What about personal details? Things a wife would know about her husband. Vincent was quiet for a moment. What would you like to know? Everything, Arya said. Your favorite food, your hobbies, what you do when you can't sleep. If we're going to convince people we're in love, I need to know you as more than just my mysterious husband who works all the time. Something shifted in Vincent's expression. Most people don't care to know those things about me. I'm not most people, Arya said simply. Vincent studied her face for a long moment, as if trying to decide whether she was sincere. Finally he leaned back in his chair. I like Italian food, especially my mother's recipe for lasagna, which Mrs. Patterson has memorized. I read mystery novels when I can't sleep, usually old ones from the 1940s and 50s. I play piano, though not very well. I collect vintage watches and I have a workshop in the basement where I restore them. You restore watches? Vincent nodded, and for the first time since she'd met him, he looked almost embarrassed. It's precise work. Requires complete focus. I find it calming. That's not embarrassing, Arya said. That's fascinating. Can I see your workshop sometime? Vincent's eyes widened. You'd want to? Of course. I'd love to understand what you're passionate about. They talked for another hour, sharing stories and getting to know each other in a way that felt surprisingly natural. Arya learned that Vincent had graduated from MIT at 19, that he spoke 4 languages, and that he had a secret weakness for old black and white movies. Vincent discovered that Arya wanted to be a teacher, that she could play guitar, and that she had once spent an entire summer reading every book in her local library. We should probably do this more often, Vincent said as they prepared to part ways for the evening. Have dinner together? Talk, Vincent clarified. If we're going to make this marriage believable, we need to be comfortable with each other. Arya nodded. I'd like that. As she prepared for bed that night, Arya reflected on how much her opinion of Vincent had changed in just one evening. He wasn't the cold, distant man she'd imagined. He was intelligent and thoughtful, with hidden depths that intrigued her. Living with him might not be as difficult as she'd feared. In fact, she was beginning to think it might be quite pleasant. But as she drifted off to sleep, she heard strange sounds coming from somewhere in the house, mechanical noises, like machinery running. She made a mental note to ask Mrs. Patterson about it in the morning. After all, she was living in Vincent's house now. She had a right to know what went on under its roof. What she didn't know was that those sounds would lead her to a discovery that would change everything she thought she knew about her mysterious husband. Arya woke to the sound of her phone ringing at 6 in the morning. She fumbled for it in the darkness, her heart immediately racing with worry. Early morning calls usually meant bad news. Hello, she answered, still groggy. Arya, honey, I'm so sorry to wake you. It was her mother's voice, but Sarah sounded distressed. Mom? What's wrong? Are you okay? I'm fine physically, Sarah said quickly. But there's been a problem with my apartment. The building's water main burst during the night. My place is flooded, and they're saying it could be weeks before it's habitable again. Arya sat up in bed, instantly awake. Oh no. Where are you now? I'm at the hospital still. They were going to discharge me today, but now I have nowhere to go. I called to see if I could stay with Mrs. Rodriguez next door, but her place was flooded too. I don't know what to do, Arya. I can't afford a hotel for weeks, and I'm not strong enough yet to deal with insurance companies and contractors. Arya's mind raced. Her mother couldn't go back to the tiny apartment they'd shared. It was already overcrowded with just the two of them, and her mother needed space to recover properly. Mom, don't worry, Arya said, making a decision. You're going to come stay here. Oh honey, I couldn't impose on your new husband like that. We barely know him. It's not an imposition. Vincent actually suggested it yesterday when I told him you were getting discharged soon. It was a small lie he'd offered if her mother needed help, but Arya was sure he'd meant it. Are you certain? This is still your honeymoon period. You don't need your mother underfoot. Arya almost laughed at the idea of a honeymoon period with Vincent, given their arrangement. Mom, I'm certain. Let me talk to Vincent and work out the details. I'll call you back within an hour, okay? After hanging up, Arya realized she had no idea if Vincent was even home. It was 6:30 in the morning. He might have already left for work, or he might still be asleep. She threw on a robe and ventured out of her suite, padding barefoot down the long hallway toward Vincent's wing of the house. She'd never been to this part of the mansion before. The hallway was lined with more portraits and expensive artwork, but the lighting was dimmer, more intimate. At the end of the hall, she found a set of double doors that had to lead to Vincent's suite. She raised her hand to knock, then hesitated. What if he was still sleeping? What if he was angry about being disturbed? What? The door opened before she could knock, and Vincent appeared, already dressed in a perfectly pressed suit despite the early hour. He looked surprised to see her. Arya? Is everything all right? I'm sorry to bother you so early, she said quickly. But there's been an emergency with my mother. Vincent's expression immediately shifted to concern. What happened? Is she hurt? No, she's okay, but her apartment building flooded. She has nowhere to go when she's discharged today, and she's not strong enough to deal with finding temporary housing. Arya took a breath. I know you mentioned she could stay here if needed, but I wanted to make sure you really meant it before I told her yes. Vincent didn't hesitate. Of course she can stay here. For as long as she needs. You're sure? I know having a house guest wasn't part of our arrangement. Arya, Vincent interrupted gently. Your mother just went through major surgery. She needs a safe, comfortable place to recover. We have 12 bedrooms in this house. It's not an inconvenience. Relief flooded through Arya. Thank you. I can't tell you how much this means to me. You don't need to thank me, Vincent said. She's family now. We take care of family. There was that word again, family. The way Vincent said it made something warm unfurl in Arya's chest. I'll have Mrs. Patterson prepare the blue guest suite, Vincent continued. It's on the first floor so your mother won't have to deal with stairs. There's a sitting room and a view of the garden. That sounds perfect. Vincent checked his watch. I have a conference call in an hour, but I can push it back. Would you like me to come with you to pick her up from the hospital? Arya stared at him. You would do that? Why wouldn't I? Because you barely know her. Because this isn't a real marriage. Because you have important business to handle. The words tumbled out before Arya could stop them. Vincent was quiet for a moment, studying her face. Arya, I know our marriage isn't conventional, but that doesn't mean I don't take my responsibilities as your husband seriously. Your mother matters to you, which means she matters to me. I don't understand you, Arya said softly. What do you mean? Everyone talks about you like you're this cold, heartless businessman. But you're not. You're kind. Genuinely kind. Vincent looked uncomfortable with the praise. I'm practical, he said. Taking care of your mother is the practical thing to do. But Arya saw through his deflection. Vincent Cross was a man who hid his kindness behind business logic, probably because showing emotion had gotten him hurt in the past. Practical or not, she said, I appreciate it. And yes, I'd love for you to come with me to get her. 2 hours later, they walked into Sarah's hospital room together. Sarah was sitting up in bed, looking much stronger than she had a few days ago but clearly stressed about her housing situation. Vincent, she said, brightening when she saw him. Arya said you've generously offered to let me stay at your home. I can't thank you enough. It's our pleasure, Sarah, Vincent said, settling into the chair beside her bed. How are you feeling? Much better, thanks to you. The doctor says the surgery was completely successful. I should be back to normal in a few weeks. That's wonderful news. Vincent's smile was genuine. Arya's been worried about you. She's always been a worrier, my girl. Sarah reached out and squeezed Arya's hand. Even as a little girl, she tried to take care of everyone around her. She takes after her mother then, Vincent said, and Sarah beamed. As they waited for the discharge paperwork, Sarah and Vincent chatted easily. Arya watched in amazement as her reserved, socially awkward husband charmed her mother completely. He asked about her work as a school secretary, listened attentively to her stories about difficult students and demanding teachers, and even made her laugh with a few dry observations about his own school experiences. You know, Sarah said to Arya when Vincent stepped out to bring the car around, I was worried about this quick marriage of yours. But seeing you two together, the way he looks at you and takes care of you, I think you might have found something special. Arya felt heat rise in her cheeks. If only her mother knew the truth. But Vincent was playing his part so well that even she was starting to believe they were a real couple. The ride back to the mansion was comfortable. with Sarah exclaiming over the luxury of Vincent's car and the beauty of the city from the back seat. When they pulled through the gates of the estate, Sarah fell silent. "My goodness," she finally said. "Arya, this place is like a palace." "It's a bit overwhelming at first," Arya admitted. "You'll get used to it," Vincent said, glancing at Arya in the rearview mirror. "It just takes time." Mrs. Patterson was waiting for them at the front door, and she welcomed Sarah with the same warmth she'd shown Arya. As they gave Sarah a tour of her suite, Arya noticed that Vincent had thought of everything: fresh flowers on the bedside table, a selection of books and magazines, even a small television and comfortable reading chair by the window. "This is beautiful," Sarah said, settling into the chair with a sigh of relief. "I feel like I'm staying at a 5-star hotel." "If you need anything at all, just press this button," Mrs. Patterson explained, showing her the call system. "Someone will be here immediately." After Mrs. Patterson left to prepare lunch, Vincent lingered in the doorway. "I have to go to the office for a few hours," he said to Arya. "But I'll be home for dinner. Will you be all right getting your mother settled?" "We'll be fine," Arya assured him. "Thank you again for all of this." Vincent nodded, then turned to Sarah. "Sarah, please don't hesitate to ask for anything you need. I want you to be comfortable here." "You're very kind, Vincent," Sarah said. "I can see why my daughter fell for you so quickly." Something flickered across Vincent's face, an expression Arya couldn't quite read. "She's easy to fall for," he said quietly, his eyes meeting Arya's for just a moment before he left. Arya spent the rest of the day helping her mother get settled and showing her around the parts of the mansion she was comfortable with. They had lunch in the sunny breakfast room, explored the library, which delighted Sarah, who was an avid reader, and walked through the gardens. "This is all quite overwhelming," Sarah said as they sat in the garden that afternoon. "When you said you'd married a wealthy man, I pictured someone comfortable, not someone who lives like royalty." "It's a lot to get used to," Arya agreed. "How are you handling it? The adjustment to married life, I mean. It's a big change." Arya chose her words carefully. "Vincent is a good man. He's patient with me while I figure everything out." "He loves you very much," Sarah said with certainty. "What makes you say that?" "The way he looks at you when you're not paying attention. The way he anticipated your needs today without being asked. The way he talks about you." Sarah smiled. "I was married to your father for 15 years, honey. I know what it looks like when a man is smitten." Arya felt a strange flutter in her chest. Vincent was certainly playing his part well, but was it possible that some of what her mother was seeing was real? The thought both thrilled and terrified her. That evening at dinner, Arya watched Vincent interact with her mother and began to see him through Sarah's eyes. He was attentive without being overbearing, interested in Sarah's stories without being patronizing. He treated her with genuine respect and warmth, not the polite indifference of someone doing a duty. When Sarah mentioned that she was worried about the cost of replacing everything she'd lost in the flood, Vincent immediately offered to have his insurance people handle everything. "I couldn't ask you to do that," Sarah protested. "You're not asking," Vincent said simply. "I'm offering. It's what family does for each other." After dinner, as they said goodnight, Sarah hugged Vincent warmly. "Thank you for taking such good care of my daughter," she whispered to him. "I can see how happy you make her." Vincent's eyes found Arya's over her mother's shoulder. "She makes me happy too," he said, and something in his voice made Arya's heart skip. Later that night, as Arya prepared for bed, she reflected on the day. Vincent had been nothing but generous and kind, going far beyond what their business arrangement required. He was either an exceptionally good actor, or there was more to his feelings for her than she'd realized. Either way, she was beginning to understand that Vincent Cross was nothing like the man the world thought he was. He was complex and caring, hidden behind walls that were slowly beginning to crack. And despite herself, despite the circumstances that had brought them together, Arya was finding herself genuinely drawn to the man she'd married. The question was, what was she going to do about it? It was the mechanical sounds that finally drove Arya to investigate. For a week now, every night around 11 o'clock, she heard them, a rhythmic humming and clicking that seemed to come from somewhere below her room. The sounds weren't loud enough to keep her awake, but they were persistent enough to make her curious. Vincent worked late every night, often not returning until well after midnight. Her mother had been staying with them for 5 days now and was recovering beautifully, spending her days reading in the library or helping Mrs. Patterson with small tasks around the house. Everything was settling into a comfortable routine, except for those mysterious nighttime sounds. On Friday evening, Arya decided she couldn't ignore her curiosity any longer. Her mother was already asleep, exhausted from a day of gentle walking in the gardens. Vincent had come home for dinner but had excused himself afterward, saying he had work to catch up on. Arya had seen lights on in what she assumed was his study, but she hadn't wanted to disturb him. Now, at 11:15 she could hear those familiar mechanical sounds starting up again. They seemed to be coming from the direction of Vincent's study, but lower. From the basement perhaps. Arya had never explored the basement of the mansion. Mrs. Patterson had mentioned during her initial tour that the lower level contained storage rooms, the wine cellar, and some of Vincent's workshop space, but they hadn't gone down there. Now, wearing her robe and slippers, Arya quietly left her suite and made her way through the dark hallways. She found the basement stairs behind a door she'd previously assumed led to a closet. The stairway was well lit and carpeted, not the dark, dingy basement stairs she'd expected. At the bottom, she found herself in a wide hallway with several doors branching off it. The mechanical sounds were much clearer now, coming from behind a door at the end of the hall. Light seeped out from underneath it, and she could hear what sounded like classical music playing softly. Arya approached the door cautiously. It was slightly ajar, and she could see into what appeared to be a sophisticated workshop. Workbenches lined the walls, covered with precision tools, computer equipment, and what looked like electronic components. The mechanical sounds were coming from several machines that seemed to be running some kind of automated processes. And there, bent over a workbench with a jeweler's loupe in his eye, was Vincent. He wasn't working on watches as he'd told her. He was working on something much more complex: circuit boards and computer chips and components she couldn't even identify. The concentration on his face was intense, and his scarred hands moved with practiced precision as he soldered connections and tested circuits. Arya was so absorbed in watching him work that she didn't notice she'd pushed the door open wider until it creaked softly. Vincent's head snapped up, and their eyes met across the workshop. "Arya," he said, quickly removing the loupe and setting down his tools. What are you doing down here?" "I heard sounds," she said, stepping fully into the room. "I was curious. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to spy on you." Vincent stood up, his expression unreadable. "You said you thought I restored watches." "You said you restored watches," Arya corrected gently. "I see now that was not exactly the whole truth." Vincent's jaw tightened. "It's complicated." Arya looked around the workshop with new eyes. The equipment was far more sophisticated than anything needed for watch repair. Multiple computer monitors showed what looked like security feeds, financial data, and communication systems. This wasn't a hobbyist's workshop, this was a command center. "Vincent," she said quietly, "what is all this?" Vincent was silent for a long moment, clearly debating how much to tell her. Finally, he sighed and ran a hand through his hair. "It's exactly what it looks like," he said. "A monitoring and communications center." "Monitoring what?" "Families in crisis," Vincent said. "People who need help but don't know where to find it. People like you and your mother." Arya felt a chill run down her spine. "You've been watching people?" "Not watching," Vincent said quickly. "Monitoring public records, hospital admissions, foreclosure notices, bankruptcy filings. Looking for people who fall through the cracks of the system." "Why?" Vincent gestured to one of the computer screens which showed a scrolling list of names and data. "Because the system is broken, Arya. People suffer and die while bureaucrats push papers and insurance companies deny claims. Someone has to help." Arya moved closer to the screen, reading the information scrolling past. Medical bills, mortgage payments, education costs, all the financial emergencies that could destroy a family overnight. "You help them?" she asked. "When I can." Vincent's voice was quiet. "Anonymous donations usually. Medical bills paid, mortgages caught up, college tuition covered. I have people who handle the actual transactions so it can't be traced back to me." Arya stared at him. "How many people have you helped?" "Over the past 5 years? About 800 families." 800. Arya's voice was barely a whisper. Vincent nodded. "It started small. I'd see a news story about someone losing their home or a child needing surgery the family couldn't afford. I'd have my lawyers quietly take care of it. But then I realized I could do more if I was systematic about it." "So you built all this," Arya said, gesturing around the workshop. "I built a way to find people before they reached the point of desperation. Early intervention. Prevention rather than just response." Arya felt like the floor had shifted beneath her feet. "Vincent, this is incredible. You're like some kind of guardian angel." Vincent's expression darkened. "I'm nothing of the sort. I'm a man with too much money trying to balance the scales." "Balance what scales?" Vincent was quiet for so long that Arya thought he wasn't going to answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was raw with an emotion she'd never heard from him before. I inherited a fortune I didn't earn, built on the backs of workers my great-grandfather exploited. I live in luxury while people die from lack of medical care. I have more money than I could spend in 10 lifetimes while children go hungry. He turned to look at her directly. How is that fair? How is that right? So you're trying to fix it, Arya said softly. I'm trying to do something with the privilege I was born into other than just accumulate more wealth. Arya looked around the workshop again, seeing it with new understanding. This wasn't just a hobby or even a charitable project. This was Vincent's life's work, his mission. Is this why you're so secretive? Why you avoid public appearances? Vincent nodded. If people knew what I was doing, it would change everything. Some would try to stop me, others would exploit it. The families I help would become targets for media attention they don't want. And he paused. I'd become a public figure, which is the last thing I want. Because of how you look, Arya said. Partly. But also because I don't want the attention. I don't want to be praised for doing what anyone with a conscience should do. I just want to help people quietly and effectively. Arya felt tears prick her eyes. That's why you needed a wife. Not just for business credibility but to maintain your cover. To have a normal-looking life that would deflect suspicion. Yes, Vincent said simply. And my father? How did he fit into this? Vincent's expression grew uncomfortable. Your father worked security at one of my buildings. When your mother got sick, he applied for emergency financial assistance through the company program. That's how I learned about your situation. You didn't seek us out, Arya realized. We came to your attention through your system. Yes. And when I saw that your mother's case was exactly the kind of situation I'd been helping people with, I wanted to cover her medical expenses. But then I learned about the business pressure I was facing, the need for a wife to legitimize my public image. Vincent looked down at his hands. I realized I could solve both problems at once. So you proposed the marriage arrangement. I had your father suggest it, yes. I thought it would be easier if it came from him rather than from me directly. Arya processed this information, her mind reeling. Vincent, do you realize what you've told me? That I'm not the man you thought you married? No, Arya said firmly. You've told me that you're a much better man than you pretend to be. You've dedicated your life to helping people, and you've been doing it in secret because you don't want credit or attention. You've helped 800 families, Vincent. 800. Vincent shook his head. I'm not a hero, Arya. I'm just someone with resources trying to use them responsibly. And that's exactly what makes you a hero, Arya said softly. They stood in silence for a moment, the weight of Vincent's revelation settling between them. Arya understood now why he was so guarded, why he kept himself isolated. He wasn't just protecting himself from people's reactions to his scars, he was protecting a secret that could change countless lives. Can I ask you something? Arya said. Of course. Why are you telling me this? You could have kept it secret forever. Vincent was quiet for a long moment. Because you're my wife, he said finally. Even if our marriage isn't conventional, you deserve to know who you're living with. And because... He paused, seeming to struggle with the words. Because I'm tired of being alone with this. It's a heavy burden to carry by yourself. Arya felt her heart clench at the loneliness in his voice. You don't have to carry it alone anymore. Vincent looked at her sharply. What do you mean? I mean I want to help, Arya said. If you'll let me. I can't build computer systems or hack into databases, but I can help in other ways. I was going to be a teacher, Vincent. I know how to connect with people, how to understand what they need. Arya, you don't understand what you're offering. This isn't a part-time charity project. This is dangerous, complex work that requires absolute secrecy. Then teach me, Arya said simply. Show me how to help. I married you to save my mother, but now I want to help you save other people's mothers too. Vincent stared at her for a long moment, something shifting in his expression. You really mean that? I do. Vincent, what you're doing is amazing. It's the most important work I've ever heard of. If you'll let me be part of it, I'd be honored. Vincent sat down heavily in his desk chair, suddenly looking exhausted. I never expected this, he said quietly. What? To find someone who would understand. Who would want to help rather than run away or try to stop me. Arya moved closer to him. I'm not going anywhere, Vincent. And I'm not going to try to stop you from doing good in the world. Vincent looked up at her, and for the first time since she'd known him, his guard was completely down. She could see the vulnerability in his eyes, the hope he was afraid to feel. There's something else, he said quietly. What? Your mother's situation. The timing of her illness, the insurance denial, even the flooding of her apartment. Vincent's voice was barely above a whisper. None of it was coincidence. Arya felt the blood drain from her face. What are you saying? I'm saying that sometimes, when my system identifies someone who needs help, I make sure they get it by creating circumstances that bring them to my attention. Your mother's insurance was always going to be denied. I made sure of that. The flooding in her building was caused by a malfunction in the water main that my people arranged. Arya stepped back, her mind reeling. You manipulated our entire situation? I created opportunities to help you, Vincent said quickly. Your mother really was sick. She really needed surgery. The medical bills were real. I just influenced the circumstances that brought you to me. So our marriage, everything we've been through, it was all manufactured? Vincent stood up, reaching toward her. Arya, please understand. No, Arya said, backing away from him. I need to think about this. I need to process what you've told me. Arya, wait. But she was already heading for the door, her mind spinning with the implications of Vincent's revelation. Everything she thought she knew about their situation, about their marriage, about Vincent himself, it had all been orchestrated. She didn't know whether to be angry or impressed, terrified or grateful. The man she'd married was even more complex and mysterious than she'd imagined, and she had no idea what that meant for their future together. As she climbed the stairs back to the main floor, one thought kept echoing in her mind. Vincent Cross wasn't just her husband or even a secret philanthropist. He was a man who could manipulate reality itself to achieve his goals. The question was, could she trust someone with that much power even if he used it to help people? And more importantly, was she falling in love with a man who had orchestrated their entire relationship from the beginning? Arya didn't sleep that night. She lay in her bed staring at the ceiling, her mind racing with everything Vincent had revealed. Part of her was angry at being manipulated, but a larger part was awed by the scope of what he was doing. 800 families. 800 lives changed for the better. And her mother was alive because of him. The next morning she found herself standing outside Vincent's study at 7 a.m., knowing he would be awake and probably already working. She knocked softly. Come in, his voice called. Vincent looked up from his desk as she entered, and she could see the exhaustion in his eyes. He probably hadn't slept either. Arya, he said, standing up. I wasn't sure you'd want to see me this morning. I've been thinking all night, Arya said, moving to sit in the chair across from his desk. About what you told me. About what you've been doing. Vincent sat back down, his expression guarded. And? I'm angry that you manipulated our situation, Arya said honestly. But I understand why you did it. And I'm grateful that you saved my mother's life, regardless of your methods. Vincent's shoulders relaxed slightly. I know it's a lot to process. It is. But Vincent, what you're doing helping all those families, it's incredible. It's the most important work I've ever heard of. Arya leaned forward. I meant what I said last night. I want to help. Even knowing how I operate. Even knowing that I manipulate situations to achieve my goals. Arya was quiet for a moment, considering. Vincent, do you manipulate situations to hurt people or to help them? To help them, Vincent said immediately. Then yes, even knowing that. Because the result is that people who were suffering are now safe. Children get the medical care they need. Families keep their homes. Students can afford college. Arya met his eyes directly. You're using your power and resources to make the world better. How could I object to that? Vincent stared at her for a long moment. Most people would be disturbed by what I do. The level of surveillance, the manipulation of circumstances. I'm not most people, Arya said simply. And I think you know that, or you wouldn't have told me the truth. Vincent nodded slowly. I told you because I wanted you to know who you really married. And because I hoped. He trailed off. Because you hoped what? Because I hoped you might understand. That you might not run away. Arya felt her heart clench at the vulnerability in his voice. I'm not running away, Vincent. But I need to understand more about what you do. How it works, how you choose who to help, what the risks are. Vincent's expression shifted, becoming more businesslike. It's Saturday. I don't have any meetings today. If you really want to understand, I can show you. I'd like that. Vincent stood up. Then let's go back to the workshop. But first we should check on your mother. They found Sarah in the breakfast room, chatting with Mrs. Patterson over coffee and looking healthier than she had in months. The color was back in her cheeks and she was moving with more energy. Good morning, you too, Sarah said brightly. You're both up early for a Saturday. Vincent's going to show me some of his work, Arya said, settling into the chair beside her mother. How are you feeling this morning? Wonderful. I think I'm finally starting to feel like myself again. Sarah smiled at Vincent. This place has been like a miracle cure. Good food, beautiful surroundings, no stress about money or insurance or medical bills. I'm glad you're comfortable here, Vincent said. You're welcome to stay as long as you need. You're very kind. But I should probably start thinking about finding a new apartment soon. I can't impose on your hospitality forever. Vincent and Arya exchanged a look. Mom, Arya said gently, there's no rush. Take all the time you need to recover fully. After breakfast, Vincent led Arya back down to his workshop. In the daylight streaming through small basement windows, the space looked less mysterious and more like what it was, a sophisticated command center for charitable operations. Where do we start? Arya asked. Vincent moved to one of the computer workstations. With how I identify people who need help. This program monitors public records, hospital admissions, bankruptcy filings, foreclosure notices, unemployment claims. It looks for patterns that indicate families in crisis. Arya watched as Vincent pulled up the monitoring system. Streams of data flowed across multiple screens, processed by algorithms that flagged cases meeting certain criteria. How do you decide who to help? She asked. The system prioritizes based on several factors, Vincent explained. Severity of need, likelihood that intervention will be successful, family situation, we focus on families with children or elderly members, and honestly, available resources. I have a lot of money, but even I can't help everyone. Arya studied the data streaming past. This is overwhelming. How do you handle all of this emotionally? Seeing so much suffering every day? Vincent was quiet for a moment. Some days it's hard, he admitted. But knowing that I can make a difference for some people makes it worthwhile. And I've learned to focus on the successes rather than the cases I can't help. He pulled up another screen showing a map with dozens of green dots scattered across the city and surrounding areas. What are those? Arya asked. Families we've helped successfully. Green means their stable, medical bills paid, mortgages current, children's education funded. Yellow means they need ongoing monitoring. Red means they need immediate intervention. How many red dots are there right now? Vincent clicked to filter the display. 37 active crisis situations. Arya felt her heart sink. 37 families in crisis right now? That's actually low for this time of year, Vincent said. During the winter months, we usually have 50 to 60 active cases. Can you help all of them? Most of them. Some situations are too complex or dangerous for direct intervention. Domestic violence situations, for example, those require law enforcement involvement. Vincent walked her through several case studies, showing her how they identified families in need, researched their situations, and developed intervention strategies. Some cases were straightforward: medical bills paid anonymously, mortgage payments caught up through shell companies. Others were more complex, requiring coordination with hospitals, schools, or government agencies. This is incredible, Arya said after an hour of walking through the system. You've built an entire secret social safety net. That's exactly what it is, Vincent agreed. A way to catch people who fall through the cracks of the official system. Who else knows about this? Very few people. I have 3 employees who handle the financial transactions and logistics, but they work remotely and don't know the full scope of the operation. Mrs. Patterson suspects something, but she's never asked direct questions. And now you. Arya felt the weight of the secret settling on her shoulders. Vincent, what would happen if this became public? Vincent's expression darkened. Everything would change. The media would sensationalize it. Government agencies would get involved and slow everything down with bureaucracy. Some of the families we've helped would become targets for scammers or media attention they don't want. He paused. And I would lose the ability to operate quietly and effectively. Is that why you've been so careful about your public image? Why you needed a wife to appear normal? Partly. But also because the work itself is lonely. I spend most of my time alone in this basement, monitoring other people's lives but not really living my own. Arya heard the loneliness in his voice and felt her heart ache for him. Vincent, you don't have to be alone anymore. I meant what I said about wanting to help. Vincent turned to look at her directly. Are you sure? This isn't just volunteer work, Arya. If you become part of this, you'll be taking on the same risks I face. The same secrecy requirements. The same emotional burden. I understand, Arya said. And yes, I'm sure. Vincent studied her face for a long moment, then nodded. Then let's start with something simple. There's a family in the suburbs, the Johnsons. Father lost his job 3 months ago, mother is pregnant with their third child. They're behind on their mortgage and the baby will need surgery after birth for a heart defect. He pulled up their file on the computer. The intervention is straightforward: catch up their mortgage payments and set up a medical fund for the baby. But someone needs to coordinate with the hospital to ensure the family doesn't get suspicious about the anonymous donations. I could do that, Arya said immediately. I could pose as a hospital social worker or financial counselor. Vincent smiled, the first real smile she'd seen from him since last night. Actually, that's exactly what I was thinking. You have the right background and personality for it. They spent the rest of the morning planning the Johnson intervention, with Vincent teaching Arya how to research families without invading their privacy, how to coordinate anonymous donations, and how to ensure their help couldn't be traced back to them. This is like solving puzzles, Arya realized as they worked. Finding ways to help people without them knowing where the help is coming from. Exactly. The best interventions are the ones where families think they've received help from legitimate sources: insurance companies, charities, government programs. We never want them to know they've been targeted for help. Because that would make them feel like charity cases. And because it would compromise their privacy and potentially put them in danger. As they worked together, Arya began to see a different side of Vincent. His intelligence and analytical skills were obvious, but she also saw his compassion and his deep commitment to helping others. This wasn't just a hobby or a way to salve his conscience, it was his life's calling. Vincent, she said as they finished planning the Johnson intervention, can I ask you something personal? Of course. What made you start doing this? What was the first case that made you realize you wanted to help people this way? Vincent was quiet for a long moment, his fingers drumming against the desk. When he finally spoke, his voice was soft with memory. There was a little girl in the children's ward when I was in the hospital after my accident. Emily. She was 6 years old and needed a heart transplant, but her family couldn't afford the anti-rejection drugs she'd need afterward. The doctors said they couldn't put her on the transplant list without proof that her family could pay for the medications. Arya felt tears prick her eyes. What happened to her? She died while waiting, Vincent said quietly. 3 weeks after I was discharged. I read about it in the newspaper, a 6-year-old girl who died because her family couldn't afford medicine that cost less than what I spend on clothes in a month. Oh, Vincent. That's when I realized that having money wasn't just about privilege, it was about responsibility. I had the power to save lives and I was wasting it on things that didn't matter. Arya reached out and covered Vincent's scarred hand with hers. So you started helping other people like Emily? I started trying to make sure no other child died because their family couldn't afford medical care. They sat in silence for a moment, Arya's hand still covering Vincent's. She could feel the warmth of his skin, the slight tremor that suggested he wasn't used to being touched with such gentleness. Thank you for telling me, she said softly. Thank you for understanding, Vincent replied. As they looked at each other across the desk, Arya felt something shift between them. This wasn't just about their business arrangement anymore, or even about the charitable work. This was about two people who had found something unexpected in each other: understanding, respect, and maybe something deeper. We should probably go check on your mother, Vincent said finally, but he didn't pull his hand away from hers. Probably, Arya agreed, but she didn't move either. They stayed like that for another moment, hands touching, eyes locked, both of them aware that something fundamental had changed between them. The walls Vincent had built around himself were starting to crumble, and Arya was finding herself drawn to the complex, caring man behind them. Whatever happened next, she knew there was no going back. She was part of Vincent's world now, part of his mission, and maybe just maybe part of his heart. The charity gala was exactly what Arya had expected: a glittering display of wealth and social status held in the ballroom of the city's most exclusive hotel. Women in designer gowns that cost more than most people's cars mingled with men in perfectly tailored tuxedos, all of them competing to see who could look the most charitable while drinking champagne that cost more per bottle than many families spent on groceries in a month. Arya smoothed the skirt of her own gown, an elegant navy blue dress that Vincent had insisted on buying for her, and tried to calm her nerves. This was their first public appearance as a married couple, and she knew they were being watched carefully. You look beautiful, Vincent said quietly, offering her his arm as they approached the entrance. Thank you, Arya replied, grateful for the steadiness of his presence beside her. You clean up pretty well yourself. Vincent did look handsome in his black tuxedo, she had to admit. The formal wear emphasized his height and broad shoulders, and he carried himself with the confidence of a man who belonged in these circles, even if he preferred to avoid them. Remember, he said as they paused outside the ballroom doors. "We've been together for 6 months, married for 3 weeks. We met when you visited your father at work one evening. And it was love at first sight," Arya added with a slight smile. "For me, certainly," Vincent said, and something in his tone made her look at him sharply. But before she could analyze his expression, the doors opened and they were swept into the crowd. The evening was a masterclass in social performance. Vincent introduced Arya to his business partners and their wives, all of whom were clearly curious about the woman who had finally captured the elusive Vincent Cross. Arya smiled and played her part, answering questions about their whirlwind romance and deflecting inquiries about Vincent's appearance with such grace that even she was impressed with herself. "You're quite the actress," commented Margaret Thornton, the wife of one of Vincent's major business partners, as they stood by the bar while their husbands discussed some deal. "Most women would be more obvious about trying to hide their husband's scars." Arya felt a flash of anger at the woman's casual cruelty, but she kept her voice level. "I don't see anything that needs hiding," she said simply. "Vincent is a handsome man." Margaret looked surprised by the sincerity in Arya's voice. "You really mean that?" "Of course I do. I married him, didn't I?" "Well, yes, but we all assumed." Margaret trailed off, clearly realizing she was venturing into inappropriate territory. "Assumed what?" Arya asked sweetly. "Nothing, dear. You just seem very genuine in your affection for him." Arya glanced across the room to where Vincent was deep in conversation with a group of businessmen. As if sensing her gaze, he looked up and caught her eye, offering her a small smile that made her heart flutter unexpectedly. "I am genuine," Arya said to Margaret, surprising herself with the truth of the statement. Later, as they swayed together on the dance floor to a slow waltz, Vincent murmured in her ear, "You're handling this perfectly." Margaret Thornton looked like she'd swallowed her tongue when you defended me to her. "She was being unnecessarily cruel," Arya said. "I don't like bullies." Vincent's arm tightened around her waist. "Most people wouldn't have bothered to defend me." "Most people are idiots," Arya replied, echoing what she'd said to him during their first meeting. Vincent chuckled, the sound rumbling through his chest where her hand rested. "Indeed they are." As the evening progressed, Arya found herself genuinely enjoying Vincent's company. Away from the intensity of his secret work, he was charming and funny, with a dry wit that had her laughing despite herself. When he talked about his business, the legitimate parts, his intelligence and passion were obvious. And when he looked at her, especially when he thought no one else was watching, there was something in his eyes that made her wonder if their arrangement was becoming something more real than either of them had planned. "You're very good at this," Arya said as they took a break from dancing. "At what?" "Being charming. Making people believe we're really married." Vincent's expression grew serious. "Is that what you think I'm doing? Acting?" Before Arya could answer, they were interrupted by Robert Thornton, Margaret's husband and one of Vincent's business partners. "Vincent, I have to say marriage seems to agree with you," Robert said, clapping Vincent on the shoulder. "You seem more relaxed. More approachable." "Thank you, Robert. I'm very happy. It shows." "And Arya, you're a delightful addition to our social circle. I hope we'll see much more of you both at future events." After Robert moved away, Vincent turned back to Arya. "He's right, you know. About marriage agreeing with me. It's only been 3 weeks, Arya pointed out. 3 weeks of not being alone in that house. 3 weeks of having someone to talk to, someone who understands what I'm trying to accomplish." Vincent's voice grew softer. 3 weeks of feeling like maybe I'm not quite as isolated from the world as I thought. Arya felt her heart skip. "Vincent, I know our arrangement wasn't supposed to include genuine feelings," he said quickly. "But I can't help how I feel about you, Arya. You've changed everything for me." Before Arya could respond, the lights dimmed and the evening's program began. They found their seats at Vincent's table and listened as various speakers talked about the charity's work with children in need. Arya watched Vincent's face during the presentations, seeing how intently he listened to every story of a child helped, every statistic about lives changed. "The hospital needs to raise $2 million for their new pediatric heart surgery unit," she whispered to him during one presentation. Vincent nodded. "They'll have it," he murmured back. "You're going to donate?" "Anonymously, through one of my shell companies. But yes." Arya felt a rush of affection for this man who gave away millions while letting others take credit for his generosity. "You really are amazing," she whispered. Vincent turned to look at her, and the intensity in his dark eyes made her breath catch. "So are you," he said quietly. The drive home was quiet, both of them lost in their own thoughts. It wasn't until they were back in the mansion, standing in the entrance hall while James took the car away, that Vincent spoke again. "Arya, about what I said tonight." "Which part?" she asked, though her heart was racing because she knew exactly which part he meant. "About having feelings for you that weren't part of our arrangement." Arya took a deep breath. "Vincent, I need to be honest with you too." "About what?" "About the fact that I'm having the same problem," she said softly. This was supposed to be business, but somewhere along the way it stopped feeling like pretending. Vincent's eyes widened. "You mean that?" "I mean that when Margaret Thornton made those comments about your scars tonight, I wanted to defend you not because it was part of my role as your wife, but because the idea of anyone hurting you made me angry." Arya stepped closer to him. "I mean that when you told me about Emily, the little girl who died, I wanted to hold you and tell you that what you're doing in her memory is beautiful and important." "Arya." "And I mean that when you look at me the way you're looking at me right now, I forget that we're supposed to be pretending." Vincent reached up and cupped her face gently in his hands. "What if we stopped pretending?" he asked quietly. "What would that mean?" "It would mean that maybe this marriage could become something real. Something we both want instead of something we both need." Arya's heart was pounding so hard she was sure he could hear it. "Vincent, are you saying you want this to be a real marriage?" "I'm saying I've fallen in love with you," Vincent said simply. "Completely, hopelessly in love with you. And I'm hoping that maybe, possibly, you might feel something similar for me." Arya stared up at him, seeing the vulnerability in his eyes, the fear that she might reject him. This powerful, complex man who could move mountains to help strangers was afraid that she might not want him. "I do," she whispered. "I love you too." Vincent's face transformed with relief and joy, and he leaned down to kiss her. This wasn't the careful, brief kiss they'd shared at their wedding ceremony. This was deep and passionate and full of all the feelings they'd been holding back. When they finally broke apart, both of them were breathing hard. "So what happens now?" Arya asked. "Now we figure out how to be really married," Vincent said with a smile. "How to build a real life together." "What about the arrangement? The contract?" "We tear it up," Vincent said immediately. "This isn't about business anymore, Arya. This is about love." Arya felt tears of happiness prick her eyes. "I love you, Vincent Cross." "I love you too, Arya Cross," he replied, and the way he said her married name made her heart soar. As they walked upstairs together, hands intertwined, Arya marveled at how much her life had changed. She'd entered into a marriage of convenience to save her mother's life, and somehow she'd found the love of her life in the process. "Vincent?" she said as they paused outside her suite. "Yes." "Tomorrow I want you to show me more of your work. I want to learn everything about what you do so I can really help you." Vincent smiled, the expression transforming his whole face. "Tomorrow I'll show you everything. We're partners now, Arya. In every sense of the word." As Arya prepared for bed that night, she couldn't stop smiling. She'd married a stranger 3 weeks ago, but somehow she'd found her soulmate. Vincent Cross was nothing like the man the world thought he was, and everything like the man she'd always hoped to find. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new opportunities to help people together. But tonight, all that mattered was that she was loved by the most extraordinary man she'd ever met. And she loved him back with all her heart. The morning after the gala, Arya woke up feeling like the world had shifted on its axis. She was in love with her husband, really, truly in love, and he loved her back. The business arrangement that had brought them together had transformed into something beautiful and real. She found Vincent in his workshop early, already dressed and working at his computer. He looked up when she entered, his face lighting up with a smile that made her heart flutter. "Good morning, Mrs. Cross," he said, standing to greet her with a gentle kiss. "Good morning, Mr. Cross," she replied, loving the way his name felt on her lips now that it came with genuine affection. "I've been thinking about our conversation last night," Vincent said, leading her to sit beside him at his desk. "About making this marriage real. There are some things we need to discuss." Such as the fact that if we're going to be really married, you need to know everything about my work. Not just the helping families part, but the more complicated aspects as well. Arya felt a flutter of nervousness. "How complicated?" Vincent pulled up a file on his computer. "Remember how I told you that I monitor public records to find families in need?" "Yes." "What I didn't tell you is that sometimes when the legal system fails people, I take more direct action." The file Vincent opened showed newspaper clippings, court documents, and what appeared to be surveillance photos. Arya scanned the information, trying to understand what she was looking at. "This is the Morrison case from last year," Vincent explained. 8-year-old girl, severe asthma, needed regular medication to survive. Insurance company kept denying her claims, saying her condition was pre-existing. Family couldn't afford the medication out of pocket. What happened? The insurance company had a pattern of denying claims for children with chronic conditions. They were betting that families couldn't afford lawyers to fight them. Vincent's jaw tightened. So I made sure they could. You paid for their legal fees? I did more than that. Vincent clicked to another screen showing financial records. I discovered that the insurance company's CEO was embezzling funds from the company's charitable foundation. I made sure that information found its way to the FBI. Arya stared at the screen. You exposed him? He was stealing money meant to help sick children while denying those same children medical care. Yes, I exposed him. What happened to him? Prison. 20 years for fraud and embezzlement. And the insurance company was forced to change their policies on pre-existing conditions for children. Arya felt a mix of admiration and concern. Vincent, that's vigilante justice. Is it justice when the system fails? Vincent asked quietly. When legal doesn't mean right? Before Arya could answer, Vincent pulled up another file. The Patterson family, no relation to Mrs. Patterson. Father was sexually abusing his two daughters, ages 6 and 9. Mother tried to report it, but he was a police officer with connections. Child Services ignored the reports. Arya felt sick to her stomach. What did you do? I gathered evidence. Video surveillance, financial records showing he was paying off people to keep quiet, recorded conversations. Vincent's voice was cold. I made sure that evidence reached the right people, federal investigators who couldn't be bought. And the father? Prison. The girls are safe with their mother now, and they're all in therapy that I'm funding anonymously. Arya stared at Vincent, seeing him in a new light. This wasn't just charitable giving. This was a man who used his resources and intelligence to fight injustice when the system failed. How many cases like this have there been? She asked. Over the past 5 years? Maybe 50 situations where I've had to take direct action against people who were hurting others. Vincent, this is dangerous. If the wrong people found out what you were doing, they'd try to stop me, Vincent said simply. Which is why absolute secrecy is essential. Arya felt the weight of what Vincent was trusting her with. This went far beyond anonymous charitable donations. This was serious, potentially life-threatening work. There's more, Vincent said quietly. More? Vincent pulled up a new file, this one marked with Arya's name. Vincent, what is this? This is why I need to tell you everything, Arya. Because your situation wasn't as random as I led you to believe. Arya felt her blood run cold. What do you mean? Your father's gambling debts. The people he owed money to. They weren't just loan sharks, Arya. They were connected to a human trafficking ring that targets young women from desperate families. What? Arya's voice was barely a whisper. Your father borrowed money from them 2 years ago. When he couldn't pay it back, they started pressuring him to offer you as collateral. They were planning to force you into prostitution to pay off his debt. Arya felt like she was going to be sick. You're saying my father was going to sell me? I'm saying he was being coerced by very dangerous people. When my system flagged your mother's medical situation, I also discovered the threat against you. I realized I could solve multiple problems at once: save your mother, protect you from the traffickers, and gain the wife I needed for business purposes. So our entire relationship was about protecting me from human traffickers? Vincent turned to face her fully. It started that way, yes. But Arya, everything I felt for you, everything that's happened between us, that's been real. Arya stood up abruptly, pacing away from the desk. How much of my life have you been controlling, Vincent? How much of what I think is my choice has actually been you pulling strings behind the scenes? Vincent stood too, his expression pained. Arya, please let me explain. Explain what? That you've been manipulating my entire existence? That my father's gambling, my mother's illness, even our marriage, it's all been part of some elaborate plan. Not a plan, Vincent said urgently. A response to threats you didn't even know existed. Arya, those men were going to take you. Within weeks. I had evidence of their plans. Arya whirled to face him. Show me. Vincent hesitated, then pulled up another file. Security camera footage, recorded phone conversations, financial transactions, all painting a picture of a criminal organization that targeted vulnerable families. This conversation was recorded 3 days before I approached your father about the marriage arrangement, Vincent said, playing an audio file. Arya heard her father's voice, shaky and desperate. Please, I just need more time. I'll get you the money. Then a cold, unfamiliar voice. Time's up, right? You pay us or your daughter pays us. One way or another. You can't do this. She's just a girl, she's in college. She's old enough to work off your debt. Pretty girl like that, she'll be popular with our clients. Arya sank into the chair, her hands shaking. They were really going to? Yes, Vincent said quietly. And your father was trapped. He couldn't go to the police because he owed them money through illegal gambling. He couldn't pay them because he didn't have the funds. He was running out of options. So you gave him an option. I gave him a way to save both you and your mother while solving my own problem. Vincent sat down across from her. Arya, I know how this looks. I know it seems like I manipulated everything. But I was trying to save your life. Arya stared at the evidence on the computer screen, her mind reeling. What happened to them? The traffickers. They're in federal prison. All of them. I made sure the FBI had everything they needed to bring them down. When? 2 weeks after our wedding. Once you were safe, I could focus on dismantling their entire operation. Arya felt tears burning her eyes. Vincent, I don't know how to process this. Everything I thought I knew about my life, about my choices. Your choice to marry me was real, Vincent said urgently. I gave you the option but you chose to say yes. Your choice to help with my work has been real. Your feelings for me, please tell me those are real. Arya looked at him, seeing the fear in his eyes. This powerful man who could topple criminal organizations was terrified that she might stop loving him. My feelings are real, she said quietly. But Vincent, this is overwhelming. You've been protecting me from threats I didn't know existed while letting me believe I was making independent choices. Because you were making independent choices within the context of the situation. Arya, would you rather I had let you be kidnapped by traffickers so you could maintain the illusion of complete autonomy? No, of course not. But... Arya rubbed her temples, trying to organize her thoughts. This is so much bigger than I understood. You're not just helping families, you're fighting organized crime. Sometimes the two things overlap, Vincent said. People like the traffickers target vulnerable families. To protect the families, sometimes you have to go after the predators. Arya stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the mansion's peaceful gardens. Her safe, beautiful world suddenly felt much more fragile. What other threats are out there? She asked. What other dangers should I know about? Vincent joined her at the window. Arya, I've made enemies. People whose illegal activities I've exposed, criminal organizations I've helped bring down. They don't know it was me, but they know someone is working against them. Are we in danger? Not immediate danger. But yes, there are risks to what I do. Which is why I've been so careful about security, so secretive about my activities. Arya turned to face him. And now you're asking me to be part of this world. To share these risks. I'm asking you to share my life, Vincent said. All of it. The good work and the dangerous work. But Arya, if you can't handle it, if it's too much, I'll understand. I can arrange for you to be safe and comfortable somewhere else. You'd let me go? Vincent's face crumpled slightly. If that's what you need to be happy and safe, then yes. Your well-being matters more to me than my own happiness. Arya stared at him, seeing the depth of his love for her in his willingness to let her walk away. This man had saved her life, possibly multiple times, and was now offering to give up his own happiness to protect her. Vincent, she said softly, I'm not going anywhere. You're not. No. I'm terrified, yes. This is so much more complex and dangerous than I imagined. But I meant what I said about wanting to help you. If anything, knowing the full scope of what you do makes me want to help even more. Vincent's relief was visible. Are you sure? This isn't a decision you can take back easily. Once you're fully part of this, you'll know things that could put you in danger if they ever came to light. I'm sure, Arya said firmly. Vincent, you saved my life. You've saved hundreds of other lives. You're fighting for people who have no one else to fight for them. How could I not want to be part of that? Vincent pulled her into his arms, holding her tightly. I love you so much, he whispered against her hair. I was so afraid you'd run when you learned the truth. The truth is that you're a hero, Arya said, pulling back to look at his face. A complicated, secretive, sometimes frightening hero, but a hero nonetheless. And I love you for it. Vincent kissed her then, deep and passionate and full of relief. When they broke apart, he rested his forehead against hers. So what happens now? Arya asked. Now I teach you everything. How to research targets, how to gather evidence, how to coordinate with law enforcement when necessary. How to protect yourself and others. Vincent's voice grew serious. And now we plan our next operation together. What's the next operation? Vincent turned back to his computer and pulled up a new file. There's a company that's been dumping toxic waste in low-income neighborhoods, causing cancer clusters in children. The EPA has been paid off to look the other way. The company's executives live in mansions while children are dying. Arya felt a familiar surge of anger at the injustice. What can we do about it? We can expose them. Gather evidence, document the health impacts, trace the money trail. Make sure the right people see the right information at the right time. Arya looked at the file, seeing photos of sick children and environmental reports showing toxic contamination. How long will it take? With your help? Maybe 3 months to build an airtight case. Then let's get started, Arya said. Vincent smiled and she saw pride and love in his eyes. Welcome to the real work, Mrs. Cross. As they settled down to begin planning their first joint operation, Arya felt a sense of purpose she'd never experienced before. This wasn't the life she'd planned, but it was the life she wanted. She was going to spend her days fighting injustice alongside the man she loved, protecting people who couldn't protect themselves. It was dangerous, complex work that would require everything she had to give. But as she watched Vincent explain the details of their next case, she knew she was exactly where she belonged. They were partners now in every sense, in love, in marriage, and in the most important work either of them had ever done. And together they were going to change the world, one family at a time. 6 months later, Arya stood in the mansion's garden watching her mother tend to the roses she'd planted in the spring. Sarah had made a full recovery from her surgery and had decided to stay permanently at the estate, claiming that she'd never been happier than she was helping Mrs. Patterson manage the household. The truth was, she'd found a family here, something she'd been missing since Arya's father had left all those years ago. She looks wonderful, Vincent said, coming up behind Arya and wrapping his arms around her waist. She does. I think this place has been as healing for her as the surgery was. Arya leaned back against Vincent's chest, feeling the steady rhythm of his heartbeat. How did the Morrison follow-up go? Perfectly. Little Emma is responding well to her new medication, and the family has no idea their insurance coverage was enhanced by an anonymous benefactor. Vincent pressed a kiss to the top of Arya's head. That makes 43 families we've helped together. In the 6 months since Arya had learned the full truth about Vincent's work, they had become true partners in every sense. She had proven to have a natural talent for research and coordination, while her warm personality made her perfect for the undercover work their operations sometimes required. Together they had helped dozens of families, exposed 3 major criminal organizations, and brought down a corrupt city councilman who had been taking bribes to ignore environmental violations. Any word on the toxic waste case? Arya asked. The EPA investigation starts next week. All 12 executives have been arrested, and the cleanup of the affected neighborhoods begins immediately. Vincent's voice carried deep satisfaction. Those children are going to get the medical care they need, and their families will be compensated for what they've suffered. And the executives? Looking at 20 years minimum for conspiracy, environmental crimes, and corruption. Vincent turned Arya in his arms so he could see her face. Justice served and dozens of children's lives saved. Arya smiled up at him, still amazed by how much her life had changed. I love this work, Vincent. I love what we do together. Even though it's dangerous? Even though we can never take credit for the good we do. Especially because of that, Arya said. The best kind of good is the kind nobody knows you're doing. Vincent's expression grew tender. Have I mentioned lately that I'm madly in love with you? Only every day, Arya laughed. But I don't mind hearing it again. I love you, Arya Cross. More than I ever thought possible. I love you too, she replied, standing on her tiptoes to kiss him. They were interrupted by Mrs. Patterson calling from the house. Mr. and Mrs. Cross? You have a visitor. They walked back to the mansion hand in hand, wondering who could be visiting on a Saturday afternoon. In the front parlor, they found Thomas Wright sitting uncomfortably on the edge of a chair, looking older and more worn than Arya remembered. Dad, Arya said, surprised. What are you doing here? Thomas stood up, his eyes not quite meeting hers. I came to apologize, he said quietly. To both of you. Vincent stepped slightly forward, his posture protective but not aggressive. Apologize for what? For the gambling. For getting involved with those people. For putting Arya in danger. Thomas's voice cracked. I know what they were planning to do to her. Vincent told me after they were arrested. Arya felt Vincent's hand squeeze hers gently. Her father's gambling had been the catalyst for everything that followed, but it had also led her to Vincent and to the most meaningful work of her life. Dad, that's all in the past now, Arya said gently. No, it's not, Thomas said firmly. I made choices that could have destroyed your life. If Vincent hadn't intervened. He shuddered. I've been sober for 4 months now. Gambling addiction treatment, therapy, the whole program. And I wanted you to know that I'm different now. That's wonderful, Dad, Arya said, and she meant it. I'm proud of you for getting help. Thomas finally looked directly at Vincent. And I wanted to thank you. For saving my daughter's life. For giving her a home and a family and... He gestured around the elegant parlor. For giving her everything I couldn't. Vincent's expression softened. Thomas, you gave her the most important things. Kindness, intelligence, compassion. Those qualities made her the woman I fell in love with. Thomas's eyes filled with tears. I don't deserve forgiveness, but I'm hoping, maybe someday? Arya stepped forward and hugged her father, feeling his surprise and then his grateful embrace. You're my dad, she said simply. We'll figure it out together. After Thomas left, promising to stay in touch and continue his recovery, Arya and Vincent sat together in the garden as the sun began to set. That was generous of you, Vincent said. Forgiving him like that. He made mistakes, but he's trying to make amends. Besides, Arya smiled, his mistakes led me to you. It's hard to be angry about that. Vincent pulled her closer on the garden bench. Arya, there's something I want to ask you. What? Vincent shifted nervously, then reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. I know we're already married, but we got married for all the wrong reasons. I want to do this right. Arya's heart stopped as Vincent slid off the bench and knelt in front of her, opening the box to reveal a stunning diamond ring. Arya Cross, will you marry me again? Not because we need each other, but because we love each other? Not for business or protection or obligation, but because we want to spend the rest of our lives together. Tears streamed down Arya's face as she looked at the man she loved kneeling before her, offering her everything his heart had to give. Yes, she whispered. Yes, of course, yes. Vincent slipped the ring onto her finger next to her wedding band, then stood and kissed her as the last rays of sunlight painted the garden golden around them. When? Arya asked when they broke apart. Next month. Here in the garden, with your mother and Mrs. Patterson and anyone else who matters to us. A real wedding this time with real vows and real promises. And a real honeymoon? Vincent grinned. 2 weeks in Italy. I thought we could combine pleasure with business. There's a human trafficking ring operating out of Rome that could use our attention. Arya laughed, loving that even their honeymoon would involve their shared mission. Only you would propose fighting crime as a romantic getaway. Is that a yes to the honeymoon too? Vincent Cross, I would go anywhere with you. To fight injustice, to save lives, or just to hold your hand and watch the sunset. 1 month later, Arya walked down a flower-lined aisle in the mansion's garden, wearing a simple white dress and carrying a bouquet of roses from her mother's garden. Vincent waited for her at an altar decorated with white silk and more flowers, looking handsome and nervous and completely in love. Sarah walked her down the aisle, beaming with pride and happiness. Mrs. Patterson stood as Arya's matron of honor, wiping away tears of joy. Even Thomas was there, sober and grateful and trying to rebuild his relationship with his daughter. The ceremony was simple and beautiful, officiated by Judge Hamilton, who had married them the first time and was delighted to do so again under much happier circumstances. Vincent Cross, Judge Hamilton said, do you take Arya to be your wife, to love and cherish, to support and protect, through whatever challenges life may bring? I do, Vincent said, his voice strong and sure. I promise to love you always, to stand by your side in all we do together, and to be worthy of the gift of your heart. Arya Cross, do you take Vincent to be your husband, to love and cherish, to support and protect, through whatever challenges life may bring? I do, Arya said, her voice clear despite her tears of happiness. I promise to love you always, to be your partner in every sense, and to spend my life helping you make the world a better place. They exchanged new rings matching bands engraved with the date of their first meeting, not their first wedding because that was when their real love story had begun. By the power vested in me, I now pronounce you husband and wife again, Judge Hamilton said with a smile. Vincent, you may kiss your bride. This kiss was nothing like their first wedding kiss. This was deep and passionate and full of all the love they'd discovered together, witnessed by people who loved them and cheered their happiness. As they walked back down the aisle together, married for the second time but in love for the first time, Arya marveled at the journey that had brought them to this moment. She had started as a desperate young woman forced into a marriage of convenience, and she had become half of a partnership that was changing lives across the city. Happy? Vincent asked as they paused at the end of the aisle. Completely, Arya replied. Are you? I never knew I could be this happy, Vincent said honestly. You've given me everything I never dared to hope for: love, partnership, purpose, family. We've given each other everything, Arya corrected. And we're just getting started. That evening, as they danced at their reception under lights strung through the garden trees, Arya reflected on the strange turns her life had taken. She'd been forced to marry an ugly billionaire to save her mother's life, only to discover that he wasn't ugly at all, just scarred and lonely. She'd entered into a business arrangement only to find the love of her life. What are you thinking about? Vincent asked as they swayed to the music. About how wrong everyone is about you, Arya said. They call you the beast of the business world, but you're actually the most beautiful person I know. Vincent's scarred face lit up with the most radiant smile. Only you would see beauty in these scars. These scars tell the story of your survival, your strength, your journey to becoming the man I love. Of course they're beautiful. As the evening wound down and their guests began to leave, Vincent and Arya stood together on the terrace, looking out over the gardens where they would begin their new life together. Ready for our real honeymoon? Vincent asked. Ready to take down a human trafficking ring in Rome with my husband? Absolutely. Vincent laughed, pulling her close. I love you, Mrs. Cross. I love you too, Mr. Cross. Now and always. As they went inside to prepare for their new adventure together, Arya knew that whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them together. They were partners in love, in marriage, and in the most important work either of them would ever do. She had married a stranger to save her mother's life, but she had found something infinitely more valuable in the process. She had found her soulmate, her purpose, and her forever. And in a world full of injustice and suffering, they would be a force for good together, one family at a time, one life at a time, one love at a time. The scared, lonely billionaire and the desperate young woman had found something. Neither had been looking for: true love, lasting partnership, and a shared mission that would change the world. It was a perfect ending to their story, and a perfect beginning to their life together. Dear readers, thank you so much for joining Arya and Vincent on their incredible journey from a marriage of convenience to true love. Their story shows us that sometimes the most beautiful relationships come from the most unexpected beginnings. What did you think of Vincent's secret mission to help families in need? Were you surprised by the revelation about the human trafficking threat? And which moment between Arya and Vincent made your heart flutter the most? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments. Did you see their love story coming, or were you surprised by how their feelings developed? What would you like to see happen in their life together after the story ends? Don't forget to share this story with anyone who loves romance with a twist of mystery and social justice. Sometimes the best love stories are the ones that remind us that love can truly conquer all.